If you take a look at the chemical breakdown of the human scalp's natural oils and compare that data to the seed extract of a tree that is forced to survive in some of the most unforgiving, just drought-stricken climates on Earth, the molecular match is, well, it's almost identical.
Yeah, it's genuinely fascinating.
Right. And usually when we examine ancient traditional remedies, we expect to find a lot of folklore, maybe a placebo effect, but very little verifiable chemistry. Like you hear about a miracle tree and you picture a mystical apothecary.
Exactly. You don't picture a controlled laboratory setting.
No, not at all. But today you are joining us for a deep dive into a source titled Moringa Hair Oil, the science of scalp and strand health. And our core mission today is to bridge that gap entirely.
Right.
We are taking the historical claims surrounding the Moringa oleifera tree and really putting them under the mass spectrometer.
Because we are looking at an absolute masterclass
Yeah.
in biological mimicry here.
Yeah.
The transition from botanical tradition to targeted, science-backed application, well, it requires us to stop viewing this extract as just a generic moisturizer. We have to start looking at the specific cellular mechanisms at play.
Right, the actual science of it.
Exactly. We're analyzing how a highly precise sequence of plant lipids and hormones actively interfaces with human biology, and how that alters the structural integrity of the hair shaft and the microenvironment of the scalp itself.
Okay, let's unpack this by starting with the molecular profile of the extract itself. Because, if you hear moringa and your brain immediately jumps to that bright green water-soluble powder people blend into their morning smoothies, you're thinking of the leaf.
Right, the leaf powder is a totally different thing.
Yeah, entirely different. We are analyzing the cold-pressed extraction from the seeds of the tree, and historically, this specific extract was cataloged in early apothecaries as Ben oil,
Ben oil, yes.
which is a moniker derived from its unusually high concentration of behenic acid, right?
Yeah, that behenic acid concentration hovers around 6 to 7%. Which is chemically significant because behenic acid is a 22-carbon chain saturated fatty acid.
Okay.
So it's a remarkably dense, shelf-stable lipid. And this distinction from the leaf powder is incredibly critical when we discuss dermatological application.
Because of how the skin absorbs things.
Precisely. Your skin's outermost layer, the stratum corneum, is a highly sophisticated lipid matrix. It is designed by evolution to repel water-soluble compounds.
Right, it's a waterproof barrier.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So if you apply a crushed water-soluble leaf extract to the scalp, it just simply sits on the surface
Yeah.
because of the hydrophobic nature of your skin's barrier.
It's an issue of basic permeability. Like, you can't force a water-soluble vitamin through a lipid defense system without some kind of engineered delivery mechanism.
No, you really can't.
But because the cold-pressed seed extract is a nutrient-dense lipid, it fundamentally alters the physics of absorption. And the primary driver of that absorption isn't actually the behenic acid that gives the oil its historical name.
No, it's not.
The vast majority of Moringa seed oil, which is roughly 70 to 75%, is actually composed of oleic acid.
Which is an 18-carbon monounsaturated omega-9 fatty acid. And when you introduce a heavy concentration of oleic acid to the human scalp, you bypass the standard resistance of the epidermal barrier.
Oh, really?
Yeah. The spacious glands in your scalp, they already produce a complex mixture of triglycerides, wax esters, and squalene to protect the follicle.
That's your natural sebum.
Right. And oleic acid's molecular structure is so remarkably close to this native sebum that the lipid matrix of your skin just doesn't register it as a foreign substance to block.
I mean, it's basically like a VIP keycard at a club.
That's a great way to put it.
Because oleic acid is structurally so similar to your natural scalp sebum, it doesn't have to wait outside the velvet rope just sitting on top of the skin. It gets deep absorption straight into the scalp. It's essentially a biological Trojan horse.
It really is.
Instead of relying on active transport or just brute forcing its way through the epidermal layers, the oleic acid simply dissolves into the pre-existing lipid defenses, because the composition of the wood in the Trojan horse perfectly matches the wood of the city gates.
Exactly. It seamlessly integrates.
Yeah.
So the oil doesn't just sit in a high viscosity layer on the epidermal surface. It achieves rapid, deep penetration straight into the follicular infundibulum.
Which is the root.
Right, the root.
Yeah.
And the efficiency of that delivery mechanism is staggering. But, an efficient delivery vehicle is only clinically valuable if the biological payload it carries actually alters the cellular environment.
Right, the truck needs to actually be carrying something useful.
Exactly. And once that oleic acid bypasses the stratum corneum, it drives several incredibly potent compounds down to the root with it. The most critical of those payload compounds is zeatin.
Zeatin. Okay, so zeatin is a purine derivative. And it's categorized as a cytokinin, which is a class of plant hormone. Out in nature, Zeatin's primary function is to synthesize proteins and drive rapid cellular division in the moringa tree itself.
Yes, the biochemical engine for the tree.
Right. It allows the tree to aggressively regenerate in these harsh, arid climates. Now, our source text is very clear on managing expectations here. Human biology lacks the specific receptors required to use a botanical cytokinin to directly accelerate our own cellular mitosis.
Right.
So we cannot force human hair follicles into a hyperactive growth phase using a plant hormone.
No, biology doesn't offer magical shortcuts for cellular division like that.
Oh.
However, the mechanism of Zeatin shifts entirely when it's introduced to the human scalp environment.
Okay, how so?
Well, while it cannot trigger mitosis, it operates as a remarkably potent electron donor. Your scalp is constantly subjected to oxidative stress.
From the environment, right.
Exactly. Environmental pollution, ultraviolet radiation, daily chemical exposure. These stressors create reactive oxygen species.
Free radicals.
Right. Free radicals. They are unstable molecules missing an electron, and they relentlessly attack and degrade the cellular structures of your hair follicles just to steal that missing electron.
They cause this whole cascade of cellular corrosion.
Yeah, it's highly destructive.
It's like if we view the scalp as the foundation or the fundamental soil from which the hair is generated, oxidative stress is essentially a highly corrosive, toxic rain constantly bombarding that soil.
That's a perfect analogy.
So the follicles are forced to divert immense amounts of metabolic energy merely to survive and repair that ongoing oxidative damage.
Which leaves very few resources for actual keratin production.
Right. So the plants, the hair, they can't thrive. But Zeatin is basically a high-tech botanical greenhouse that shields the soil. It acts as a biochemical lightning rod, right?
Yes, exactly.
It willingly donates its own electrons to those reactive oxygen species, neutralizing the volatile molecules before they can strike the cellular structures of the follicle.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, healthy hair growth isn't about magical growth serums. It's about systematically reducing cellular stress and inflammation at the root.
It's about fixing the soil.
Exactly. When you introduce a powerful antioxidant like Zeatin deeply into the dermal layers via that oleic acid carrier, you halt the oxidative degradation cascade.
Wow.
You free up the follicle's biological resources, allowing the cells to prioritize the synthesis of strong, structurally sound hair shafts.
And Zeatin isn't working in isolation down there either.
No, not at all.
The payload also contains a dense profile of tocopherols, which is vitamin E, and plant sterols. And because these are fat-soluble antioxidants, they operate synergistically to repair the stratum corneum's lipid barrier from the inside out.
Which is crucial for lowering inflammation.
Right. When your scalp's barrier is compromised, you develop microinflammation. Your immune system triggers a localized response. That manifests as tenderness or, a chronic low-grade itchiness at the root.
And redness, too.
Yeah, redness. The sterols in moringa oil actively inhibit those pro-inflammatory cytokines, driving down the microinflammation and establishing a biologically calm, optimized environment for the follicle.
So you've effectively recalibrated the internal machinery.
Hmm.
The follicle is protected from oxidative degradation, and the inflammatory markers are totally suppressed.
Right.
But that only addresses the biology of the root. The moment the hair shaft physically emerges from the scalp, the biological rules change entirely.
Because the hair is dead at that point.
Exactly.
Yeah.
The visible hair strand is biologically inert. It consists of dead keratinized cells. It has no vascular connection, no immune response, and absolutely no capacity to heal itself once it's damaged.
It is entirely dependent on external structural reinforcement.
Right. So we have to move from internal cellular metabolism to external tribology and structural engineering.
So we move from the root to the strands.
Yes. And this is where we bring the behenic acid back into the equation. As a 22-carbon chain saturated fat, its molecular weight and melting point allow it to act as a highly effective physical sealant.
Okay, a sealant.
Right. A human hair strand, if you look at it microscopically, is encased in a cuticle layer that resembles a complex series of overlapping scales, like shingles on a roof.
Yeah, I've seen those microscopic pictures.
Right. And when a hair shaft is subjected to harsh detergents or dry environments, those cuticular scales lift and flare outward.
And when those scales lift, the internal hydration of the cortex just evaporates, right?
Exactly, which compromises the strand's tensile strength.
And doesn't it also cause tangling?
Absolutely. The lifted scales dramatically increase the physical friction coefficient of the hair. The strands mechanically catch on one another, on your clothing, on your brush.
Just constant snagging.
Right, and this constant mechanical friction induces micro tears in the keratin, which ultimately results in structural failure.
Which is what we commonly call split ends and breakage.
Exactly. So the heavy molecular structure of behenic acid acts as a biological mortar. It physically binds to those lifted cuticular scales, smoothing them down and forming a hydrophobic film over the entire shaft. It gives the hair structure and a smoothing slip.
Okay, but wait. If I'm slathering a rare, natural, saturated fat like behenic acid all over my head, isn't that just going to leave a heavy, greasy residue that weighs my hair down and attracts dirt? I mean, saturated fats are heavy.
It's a very logical concern.
Right. If I apply a high concentration of behenic acid to my hair, why doesn't it instantly destroy the volume and act as a sticky magnet for every particle of environmental dust I walk through?
Well, the physics of the application actually prevent that exact scenario, and is due to the specific lipid ratio we discussed earlier.
The oleic acid.
Exactly. Remember, behenic acid only comprises about 6 to 7% of the oil. The vast majority is the oleic acid carrier, and the oleic acid acts as a solvent, dramatically lowering the overall viscosity of the blend.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. So when applied, the oleic acid drives the heavier behenic molecules deep into the microscopic fissures of the cuticular layer. The oil absorbs so rapidly into the structural voids of the hair shaft that it doesn't leave a macroscopic layer of grease on the surface.
So it sinks in instead of sitting on top.
Right. Because of its specific lipid profile and rapid absorption rate, it provides that slipping cuticle sealing without leaving a greasy residue. You get the structural reinforcement and the lowered friction of saturated fat without the heavy viscous buildup.
That makes a lot of sense. So the hydrophobic film left behind reduces that mechanical friction, which allows the strands to physically slip past one another safely.
Yes, preventing the mechanical damage.
And the sources mention it also adds a glossy shine while shielding the hair from environmental damage like wind and sun, right?
Exactly. Yeah. It alters how light refracts off the hair shaft, producing a high gloss aesthetic while simultaneously shielding the internal cortex from ultraviolet radiation.
Okay, so we have a highly elegant chemical mechanism at play here. But understanding the specific lipid interactions is honestly useless if the clinical application protocol is flawed.
It really is.
How do we actually implement this specific lipid profile into a routine in the real world without triggering adverse dermatological reactions? Like, what's the protocol?
Well, the thermodynamic properties of the oil actually dictate the application protocol. The primary directive from the source material is to gently warm the oil prior to application.
Warm it up, okay.
Yeah, elevating the temperature slightly above ambient room temperature fundamentally alters the kinetic energy of the lipid molecules. It temporarily decreases the viscosity of the oil, which optimizes it for that rapid Trojan horse penetration we want from the oleic acid.
Okay. And the physical application itself requires mechanical stimulation? You don't just paint it onto the scalp?
No, definitely not.
The protocol demands 5 to 10 minutes of active massage into the dermal layer. The mechanical pressure triggers localized vasodilation.
Right, which stimulates blood circulation.
Yeah, you are manually expanding the blood vessels surrounding the follicles, increasing the flow of oxygen and endogenous nutrients to the root. And that works in tandem with the introduced plant sterols and Zeatin.
Exactly. And following the scalp massage, the residual oil is drawn down through the lengths of the hair, mostly to address the mechanical friction at the oldest, most vulnerable sections of the keratin shaft.
The ends.
Right, the ends. The protocol specifies leaving the treatment in for a minimum of 1 hour, or optimally overnight.
Overnight, okay.
To allow full integration into the cuticular fissures.
Right.
But the subsequent step is where the majority of application errors actually occur.
The washing out part.
Yes. The oil must be thoroughly cleansed from the scalp using a gentle surfactant system, typically executed 1 to 2 times per week.
Because the risk of improper cleansing is pretty severe, right?
It is.
Even with the rapid absorption rate of oleic acid, we are still dealing with an exogenous lipid profile here. If you continuously layer this extract onto the scalp week after week without adequately washing away the residual fats, you will inevitably cause follicular occlusion.
You clog the follicles?
Yeah, you suffocate the root, trap dead skin cells, and entirely counteract the anti-inflammatory environment the zeatin is trying to build.
Which brings up a critical safety caveat. While the source notes this botanical extract is generally recognized as safe, it does require a standard dermal patch test on the forearm or, behind the ear to rule out rare localized allergic contact dermatitis.
Sure, always patch test.
Always. However, the most vital dermatological warning in the text concerns the application of these specific lipids to active dandruff conditions.
Okay, this is fascinating. The text presents a real diagnostic dichotomy regarding dandruff.
It does.
It explicitly categorizes moringa oil as an incredibly effective therapeutic for a dry, flaking scalp. It replenishes the compromised lipid matrix and eradicates those small, dry, white flakes.
Right, the flakes associated with basic moisture loss.
Yeah. But it issues an urgent warning for oily dandruff, the larger yellowish flakes. We are looking at the exact same botanical extract acting as a hero for one flaking condition and a villain for the other.
Yes.
So what does this all mean for someone standing in the mirror looking at flakes? Why is the oil a cure for one type of flake, but an absolute accelerant for the other?
This raises an important question regarding how we diagnose dermatological symptoms. Dandruff is a colloquial catch-all term for epidermal shedding, but the underlying biology of these two conditions is diametrically opposed.
They are completely different things.
Completely. A dry scalp presenting with small white flakes is suffering from a fundamental lack of lipids.
Hmm.
The cellular mortar has dried out, causing the stratum corneum to microfracture.
Okay.
Applying a 70% oleic acid profile to this condition is the exact structural remedy the tissue requires.
All right, you are directly spackling the microfractures in the epidermal barrier.
Exactly. But oily dandruff, or medically diagnosed sporadic dermatitis, is not a moisture deficiency.
It's not dry skin.
No, it is a fungal pathology. It is driven by the aggressive overgrowth of a commensal yeast naturally found on the human microbiome called Malassezia.
Malassezia, okay.
And Malassezia yeast species have a very specific metabolic limitation. They lack the genetic capability to synthesize their own fatty acids.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, so to survive and multiply, they produce enzymes that actively consume the triglycerides present in your natural sebum. They eat the specific fatty acids they need, leaving behind irritating byproducts that trigger the rapid inflammatory shedding of skin cells.
Which we recognize as large yellow flakes.
Exactly.
So if a listener has an active Malassezia overgrowth, their scalp is already an inflamed, hyperactive feeding ground for this yeast.
Yes.
If they then mechanically massage a dense concentration of oleic and behenic fatty acids directly into that fungal colony, they aren't treating the inflammation. They are delivering a massive exogenous food source directly to the yeast.
Precisely. You are pouring biological gasoline onto a fungal fire.
Wow.
If you misdiagnose the underlying pathology, you exacerbate the condition exponentially. For individuals dealing with yeast-driven seborrheic dermatitis, the protocol mandates consulting a dermatologist for professional antifungal treatments.
So they shouldn't use the oil on their scalp at all?
No. If they utilize moringa oil at all, it must be strictly isolated to the lengths of the hair shafts to manage friction, ensuring absolutely zero contact with the scalp's microbiome.
That is such a critical distinction. Okay, assuming the pathology is correct and the application protocol is executed flawlessly, the sources outline a highly specific biological timeline for results.
Yes, a three-phase physiological progression.
Right. The immediate phase, which is observable after the very first application and wash, is purely physical. You see an immediate reduction in static frizz, an increase in structural softness, and elevated shine.
Right. That is the behenic acid successfully establishing its hydrophobic film across the cuticular scales.
Yeah.
It's an instant alteration of the friction coefficients. The second phase, which materializes between the 2 and 4 week mark, represents a shift in the cellular matrix. You observe a dramatic reduction in redness, a cessation of dry flaking, and an overall calmer, more hydrated scalp environment.
And that indicates that the Zeatin and plant sterols have successfully penetrated the barrier.
Exactly. They've neutralized the localized oxidative stress and suppressed the inflammation.
And the final phase requires a commitment of 3 to 6 months. This is when the long-term structural architecture of the hair actually changes.
Because it takes months to alter the fundamental output of the anagen growth phase.
Right. Because the follicles have been operating in an optimized, low-stress dermal environment, the new keratin being produced is fundamentally denser. Combined with the daily reduction of mechanical friction on the older shafts, you achieve visible length retention that was previously impossible due to chronic breakage.
It's an incredible biochemical sequence we've traced today.
It really is.
We analyzed the biological mimicry of oleic acid, bypassing the stratum corneum's lipid matrix. We explored how Zeatin acts as a sacrificial electron donor to neutralize oxidative degradation at the cellular level.
And we documented the structural engineering of behenic acid, giving that smoothing slick and reducing the friction of the cuticle scales.
Yes.
And of course, we established the critical diagnostic boundary between treating a lipid-deficient dry scalp and actively feeding a yeast colony. It's just a flawless demonstration of how targeted science validates the seemingly mystical claims of ancient apothecaries. We've totally decoded the miracle tree.
We really have. The precision of these plant-to-human interactions is absolutely staggering. And, there is a final concept from our analysis today that warrants some deep consideration from anyone listening.
Oh, what's that?
Well, we established that Zeatin is a localized botanical hormone. Its evolutionary mandate is exclusively to drive cellular mitosis in the moringa tree to survive arid climates. Yet, when it's extracted and introduced to human cellular biology, it doesn't clash. It doesn't trigger a massive immune rejection. It seamlessly translates its function, interfacing with our cells as a perfect antioxidant shield.
That is wild to think about. It's a biochemical key evolved for a completely different organism that somehow flawlessly turns the tumblers in our own biological locks.
Exactly. It forces you to look at the sheer volume of undocumented botanicals currently existing in extreme environments around the globe. It makes you wonder how many other undiscovered botanical hormones and compounds are out there right now, hiding in plain sight within ancient traditional medicines.
Just waiting to be decoded by modern cosmetic chemistry.
Exactly. Waiting to perfectly interact with human biology. It completely reframes how we view the natural world's compatibility with our own cellular machinery.
It absolutely does. What an amazing thought to end on. Well, thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the science behind the surface, and we will catch you next time.